Set, thank you so much for joining us. We are here at the Bentonville Film Festival, the 10th anniversary showing. So glad you found this festival. I have seen your film, but for those who haven't had the opportunity yet that have come across this video, what would you like them to know about the piece?
For sure, Unseen follows the story of my dear friend Pedro, who is an aspiring social worker. Now he actually is a social worker. And Pedro happens to be a blind, undocumented immigrant. So the film is an audio-centric film that really reimagines how to create film that has blind audiences and immigrant audiences as its priority audiences in mind.
Excellent. And I mentioned and found across some things that you did some things with this film for the low vision, no vision audience. Can you tell us a little bit more about the choices you made to be more inclusive?
For sure. I think there's different ways to think about the inclusion on screen and behind the camera. So I hope it's okay. I'll just look at you. I think that's what I'm more comfortable with. With the decisions that we've made aesthetically for the film, once you watch the film, you'll notice that most of the film is out of focus. And the decision for that is really to reimagine what equitable enjoyment of a movie would be like. Pedro is blind and the film is about him. So how can I make sure that he doesn't get to enjoy the film any less than a person who can see? Because from the very beginning, I was telling Pedro, my only audience that I really care about is you. Like, I want you to watch the film when it comes out, if ever it came out, at the time 8 years ago. And I want you to be able to tell me, Seth, you understand who I am. You captured who I am through this film. But he won't be able to do that if he doesn't get to enjoy the film, much less access the film. So the decision for the out-of-focus cinematography was really done while we were filming. Like, there were times I would film without a lens. I would put tape over the aperture of the camera and poke a hole just so that enough shapes, colors, and light would be captured by the camera. But because it's tape, there's no focus ring to adjust. So a lot of these decisions and creative decisions were done in production so that when we were in the edit room, there's no turning back, because we're like stuck with that footage and we're going to move forward with it. And I think with that resourcefulness, it allowed us to be more creative. So big shout out to my editor, Daniel Chavez Ontiveros, who really brought it all to life. Excellent.
And in the journey of Pedro and yourself, the topic of being documented and DECA and some of these other programs, that there are people that fell in the gaps and how it impacted. So talk a little bit about Pedro's experience with that and your personal experience with being undocumented.
For sure, to your point also, about the inclusivity that we were really intentional about with the film, because it's a film about an undocumented person who also happens to be blind. We wanted to make sure that our creative team really reflects Pedro's reality also. So our filmmaking team is led by immigrant, undocumented, disabled, and blind artists. And I think probably our film is probably one of the first ever to really have such an intersectional team that's bringing together these communities, not just as sources of stories, but as the artists ourselves. But I think because of those intentions and because of the lack of understanding or pathways for filmmakers from our community, that also caused some perceived struggles in bringing the film to life. What I mean by that is so many film grant opportunities require citizenship status or residency to be able to apply. Even though I've been living in I grew up here, I've been living here practically most of my life, I don't get to access those opportunities, but nonetheless, so many filmmakers who are not even immigrants are getting resources to tell immigrant stories. So I think in the course of making the film, we've also had to do our own self-advocacy, which actually is another story in and of itself for another time, and how can we leverage the production of the film, not just to bring this film to life, but also creating impact at the end of the product, but also in the course of making the film itself also.
Excellent. And of course, you've mentioned that Pedro and you were friends. with Pedro, knowing him and his friendship, what inspired you to say, this is something that needs a voice. These things are lining up and more people need to hear this. What brought all this to be?
For sure. I think there's two halves to that story. The first half is that I met Pedro, as we probably learned from the film, because I was helping to run a program to support undocumented young adults to find professional development opportunities. And at the time in 2015 when we first met, there really were no opportunities for a lot of undocumented young adults. Pedro happens to be one of our fellows in that program that year, and it was through him that I realized, oh my gosh, I've been doing immigrant rights organizing advocacy since I was 18, but we never really thought about the experiences of undocumented people that have disabilities. And I think often a lot of the discourse and rhetoric about immigration also are very ableist or exclude people with disabilities. So how can we lift up this story, through Pedro? The second half of that story, though, like I said, it was really this advocacy intention that I started off with, lifting up disabled immigrants and making sure that our advocacy includes them. But as I think about it, I'm realizing, Pedro, whenever we're together, Pedro doesn't want to be saved, he doesn't want to be pitied, and I feel that orientation of how can I help, Pedro's kind of averse to that, is what I've come to realize. Pedro is his own person, and he is very independent also, while also being interdependent at the same time, and I think halfway through the filming, I'm realizing, wow, Pedro and I actually have way more in common, than I realized, And I think the more I realized and looked at our personal journeys as human beings, and the more I understood my own inner struggles, the more I understood Pedro's also. And I think it was through that lens, that plot twist. The film, if ever you watch it, and you might get this, the film is actually just as much about Pedro as it is about me, because by the end of the film, I become a character also in the film. So I think, the intention really was, how can we invite audiences who watch this film to not experience just an immigrant disabled story, but really a story that makes them understand their own humanity. One time we were at a screening and someone told me she's not an immigrant, nor is she disabled. She comes to me after the screening. I came to watch this film hoping to learn about somebody else's experience. Instead, I learned more about myself. I think that's the most validating thing a filmmaker could ever hear.
Well, and for you also have this message about making sure people know that they are enough.
Yes, yes.
And it is powerful, and she just added to that. She is enough.
Exactly. Now I was just gonna say, to your point, the whole intention that we have, whenever we share the film with audiences. Someone described the film also, and many people have described the film in many different ways. Someone told me that it's like two friends having a conversation and you're being invited into the room to observe them, and I think in the vulnerability that Pedro conveys in the film, I think often whatever industry you're in, especially I'm assuming a lot of the people who are going to watch this probably are also filmmakers in the industry that we're in, there's so much so cutthroat, and we're all expected to prove ourselves, pursue these awards or whatever, as if we're not worthy of being acknowledged for our talents just as we are, and I think really at the end of the day, what we really want to remind people, to what you're saying, all of us are worthy of dignity. We are all enough, whoever we may be, and we shouldn't have to prove anything to ourselves. I've experienced that kind of validation and love from my family, for example. I'm so lucky because my family is so loving, and by sharing our film, maybe part of me is just I want to extend the love I receive from my family and from my friends and my community to other people, because not all of us wake up every day feeling loved, and when people watch this film, I hope they get to be reminded, you're loved, you're amazing, don't forget that.
That is a gorgeous message.
And aggressive.
That's okay. Sometimes you have to 2x4 it into their head.
Yes.
You mentioned on Pedro that he is extremely independent.
Yes.
But there are certain assistances and programs that could allow him more independence, but it takes government assistance for that. And so there's assistance that has to be provided to get that government assistance to make it more independent. And you approached on some of that, but how do we as a community help and support but encourage the independence?
For sure. I think, something that I want to uplift, like this two truths being true at the same time. Pedro loves complicated things. One of them is that how do we hold multiple truths at once? Pedro is indeed quite independent. As you watch the film, like there's a scene in the film where I think Pedro needed help, but he's like, no, I'm good. Like when we were walking down the curb in the street, he's like, I'm good. Like I have my cane. I know what I'm doing. Leave me alone. And I think sometimes, as a non-disabled person, it was one of those learning moments for me. Like I need to learn how to not help people when they're not even asking for help. Actually it's just not me in relation to my friends that have disabilities, like just in general. Like sometimes people don't need help and we're trying to help them, like leave them alone, And I think, in this case also, Pedro is a very interdependent person. What I mean by that is that Pedro wasn't able to navigate his pathway to graduate from college and become a social worker without the help of his mentors and his professors, as also conveyed in the film. So that's what I mean, that Pedro is both independent and interdependent at the same time. And I think in the course of, showing to audiences the work that Pedro does, it's really unfortunate because Pedro provides such a unique skill set in his community. He is bilingual. Actually, this is discussed at the very end of the film. Pedro is bilingual. He's extremely empathetic and knows how to relate to people. He's very emotionally intelligent. I think that's the word I'm looking for. And he can provide services also for blind individuals. And I think our film kind of reframes this phrase that people think is a bad thing, the blind leading the blind. In the film, we show the blind leading the blind. And it's actually the best thing ever, because when a blind person understands what another blind person is going through, they can support and lead that person in a way that is culturally relevant and sensitive to the experiences that they go through. So all this to say, it's unfortunate that someone like Pedro has to struggle so much, and not just Pedro, all of us, so many immigrants, so many people with disabilities are expected to jump through hoops just to get access to basic living, in essence, And I think one of the things that we want people to take away, I think that question is itself the answer, like, how can we leave people behind with this feeling like, wow, like, I'm assuming there are other people like Pedro, in our community. Like, what can I do to be of support to them? What are the organizations that are doing the advocacy statewide, nationally, even locally? I'm a profound believer that small is all, to quote the words of Adrienne Marie Brown, and how can we support people in our lives, even in the most direct way? Like sometimes someone needs accessibility. Also, undocumented people, actually, I'm realizing more and more ever, undocumented people come in all shapes and sizes, and I'm realizing there are people that are undocumented that I didn't even know were undocumented, and I think we shouldn't assume who people are and where they're coming from. And the more open we communicate our welcoming to other people, I think it would invite them to share more with us and how we can be a better community member to each other.
Excellent. And you mentioned at the start your crew that worked with you are also undocumented, some differing degrees of abilities. Tell me a bit more about the crew you worked with. It sounds inspiring.
Oh my God, like we're so humbled, and I think our film is building upon the legacy of like other films, that come from these approaches. Like one of the films that was really inspiring for us in making Unseen is this documentary called Disclosure by Sam Feder, which is a film about the trans community and how also the film is led by an all-trans crew, in essence, and creative team, and using that as inspiration, our team is not just actually disabled and undocumented and immigrant, but also very queer. Pride Month is here. Happy Pride to all. It's June. And I think, you know, the ways that our team work, I think for me, what I came to realize is so much of the film world is about who you know and people hiring their friends. I think sometimes because of that also, that leads to exclusion when people who are in positions of power only have friends who look like them. So when we were getting resources for our film, I was really intentional in remembering who from my group of friends. I hired a lot of my friends in essence, you know, but those friends are not just friends. They're people that I know are extremely talented because I've worked with them before and I want to experience their talent also. But aside from their talent, I think the fact that they're bringing in their own lived experience to color the way that they understand how we would be sharing Pedro's story, so that we're not asking questions, you know, that are probably not even the most fruitful for the story, because we don't have to explain anything when everyone in the team already knows the vantage point where we're coming from. And that is true both in the editing of the film. We also are very proud to have worked with accessibility producers. Actually, when we were making our film, I was trying to figure out what am I gonna call the people in our team who is helping us to ensure that the film is accessible. So in the Googling, I ended up, you know, using a word that I couldn't find a lot in Google, you know, or in any IMDb page, the role of accessibility producer. And big shout out to our mentors and accessibility producers, Thomas Reed, Cheryl Green, and our narrator, Nefertiti Matos Olivares, who really lifted up, you know, our project to the next level to make sure it's accessible with captions, with audio descriptions in English and Spanish.
Yes, and that was one of the things when watching the film. I think the screener version I got didn't have the subtitles over the Spanish.
Oh no!
And I don't speak Spanish.
Oh my God!
But then it made it powerful for me because that's some of what of Pedro's experience until he would have learned English or other non-documented, not knowing English. You've got these people talking around you, but you're having to pick it up from other contexts.
For sure, for sure.
So
you ended up watching it with no subtitles altogether, or you ended up turning it on at some point?
It never had subtitles for me to watch.
What?
Which is fine. No,
wow.
it made it for a beautiful for me. I know your film and the showing and everything does have the subtitles. Again, this was just the one thing. But it gave it another layer to it.
Oh wow, interesting.
Of the experience.
Oh my God.
But I was able, and then I was able to find. Oh no, I was able to find things and fill in the blanks for me through other research. Mm-hmm. But that's what the experience is when you don't, when you move somewhere and you are.
Exactly.
So you created another layer you weren't even trying for.
Exactly. You know, and I think I really want to like reimagine how we think about accessibility. For me, for example, as a non-disabled person, because accessibility is not just about disability, you know. Like one example that comes to mind often, when I was 9 years old, my family used to live in Japan. And in Japan, there's a big bike culture. Like kids learn how to ride a bike since they were probably 4 or 3, you know. So by the time I was in the 4th grade, all of the people that I would be going to the field trip with were bike riders, and they get to places. My fellow 9-year-olds were getting to places using their bikes. But because I don't know still to this day how to ride a bike, all of my classmates ended up going to our destination, not riding a bike because they would exclude me, but rather they would all walk with me. Oh, I don't know if you ever watched the opening night film, Out of My Mind. You know, I think that is a film that really shows what it's like to have friends that are not thoughtful of your inclusion. Here is a complete, you know, opposite version of that, you know, where I'm so lucky that my fellow 4th graders, my classmates, would be like, you know what, Seth's gonna be left out. Let's walk because Seth can't ride a bike. And that is what accessibility really is at the end of the day, you know, tenderness. That's what it is.
Yeah, and it isn't just recognized by the ADA.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So, of course, American Disabilities, there's different versions in different places. But so for those following at home, please tell them how they can follow you, how they can follow this film, and if there's anything they can do to help you support this film and any future projects you want to talk about.
Oh my God. I'm sorry if you don't mind me asking, when is this interview going to air?
This will be shared
Right,
with,
like next week?
as soon as
Tomorrow?
possible.
Okay, great.
Bentonville will get it out, and then we'll get you, and you'll share. So
Amazing. Okay,
away.
cool. Great. Okay, so if people can follow our film on unseen-film.com. We're currently actually broadcasting and streaming on the PBS documentary series POV. So if you go to pbs.org/POV, you can catch our film streaming through this Monday. We had our broadcast premiere 3 months ago, and our broadcast deal is kind of like ending. But the film continues. We are actually going to be screening in more festivals throughout the end of the year. It's been over a year already since we're screening, and we're still screening, and it's like just such a humbling experience how audiences receive our film. And for folks that want to host their own screenings, we're actually providing fee waivers to be able to bring the film to your community. We've had organizations streaming the film through house parties, and actually in July we're screening at the National Federation of the Blind, having a screening of the film with a mostly predominantly blind audience, and we're so humbled to be able to share our film with blind communities in this way. We're screening the films internationally in Mexico also, and the reason I asked for the date is later in October, the film will have its audiobook version, a 4-chapter audiobook version that really positions the audio description of the film as a standalone artistic piece. So in October, that will be released through a platform that is yet to be announced, but hopefully folks get to check out our film, unseen-film.com, to get all these updates and to host your own screening of the film.
And how can they follow you, Set?
Oh, sure. Yeah, folks can follow me on Set Hernandez R on Instagram. I'm kind of super low-key about people following me, so I think that's the best way people can follow me. And maybe I should just also do a plug. Tomorrow, I'm part of the Pitch-a-thon, here at Bentonville Film Festival with Series Fest, where I'm pitching a TV pilot comedy that I am currently developing, and I'm also starting a new documentary feature. So we'll see how any of these things go.
Excellent. I'm going to take a moment to remind you that you are enough, and you deserve all these wonderful things that are happening, and I hope for more beautiful things for you.
Blessings to you also, to our audience. You all are enough also. Thank you so much for holding space, for listening. So blessed and grateful.